save our people.
She came to tell us of the warrior will arise.
But she knew that the child with the blue eye.
But promise me, you will tell no one why I am.
Karen, he is the son of a coward.
You never see.
Like me. You'll never let.
Delay, when will I become a hunter?
When you stop asking so many questions.
Aku.
The only way.
They are.
It's yours. You will be our leader.
Tick found the lead ball.
One is coming! It is a big bull! Delay is coming!
She could not rule over.
Survival is a rhythm played on the bones of the dead. We often look at the dawn of human struggle as a primitive climb, a simple matter of staying warm and keeping the fire alive. But the friction of this existence isn't in the hunt, it's in the expectation of what comes next. Roland Emmerich presents a world where time is a blur, where woolly mammoths and pyramids exist in the same fever dream. Yet the core of the experience is a hollow ache. The Yagal tribe isn't just fighting the cold, they are fighting the ghost of a future they don't understand. The myth of the child with the blue eyes isn't a spark of hope. It's a mark of doom. Every step Delay takes across the shifting grid of the desert is a choice to ignore the simple safety of the mountains for the crushing weight of a destiny he never asked for. We see a man chasing a shadow, trying to fix a hole in his heart left by a father who supposedly ran. But the irony of the journey is that every miles-long trek through the grime and the sun only brings him closer to the realization that his ancestors weren't cowards, they were just tired of the blood. The texture of this film is one of rust and ancient dust. It's an emotional lie that suggests a single spear can break a civilization. Yet it captures the visceral friction of a human being pushed to the edge of their own era. We are deconstructing a story where the hero wins, but the world he knew is already extinct. The mammoths are gone. The spirits are silent. All that remains is the weight of the seeds in his hand, and the memory of a woman who died just so he could keep breathing. This film is a machine built to examine the rust of tradition. It presents the hunter as a noble ghost, but it reveals the predator as a mistake of history. The Yagal are trapped in a blue-tinted void, waiting for a miracle because they are too afraid to embrace the grime of the earth. When we analyze the choices made by the characters, we see a constant struggle between the spark of individual will, the weight of ancestral ghosts. The true enemy isn't the four-legged demons or the God King. It is the refusal to change the rhythm of survival when the world around you has already shifted. We are looking at a prehistoric epic that is secretly a meditation on the hollowing out of the human spirit. The blue eyes of the child are a visual mistake, a sign that beauty can be a burden that drags an entire people into the sand. The white spear is a relic of power that creates more friction than it resolves. Every victory in this story is caked in the grime of a sacrifice. The transition from the ice of the mountains to the heat of the pyramids is a rhythmic descent into the mechanical greed of the soul. We are here to shatter the timeline of this legend, to look at the setups of Act 1 through the brutal ironies of Act 3, and to understand why the director chose to build an era only to set it on fire. This deconstruction is for those who seek the marrow beneath the cinematic bone. We aren't here for a simple walkthrough of the plot. We are here to analyze the structural rot and the cinematic irony that Emmerich baked into this prehistoric epic. As a lead producer and critic, I demand we look at the choices made by the story architects, the decision to swap a father's spear for a handful of grain, and how that single mistake redefined a tribe's soul. This is high authority cinema analysis. NORACAP. 2. No fluff. Just the weight of the film. The resurrection of a ghost, the final exhale of a dying era, doesn't happen with a roar. It happens with the frantic, wet gasps of a man holding a ghost in the dirt. When the dust of the pyramids finally settles, the story reaches a point of absolute emotional friction. Evelate, the woman whose very existence was a map for Dele's journey, lies still. Those blue eyes, which the opening frames of the film promised would be a blessing for the tribe, are now just vacant glass reflecting a sun that doesn't care about prehistoric prophecies. This is the moment where the legend breaks. The voice that guides the initial seconds of the film, a gravelly, ancient tone, speaks of truth and legend as if they are separate entities. But here, in the grime of a fallen civilization, they collide with a sickening thud. The weight of this specific choice by the director is heavy. To kill the prize at the very moment of victory is a subversive rhythm. It strips away the action-adventure veneer and leaves us with the raw, cold texture of human loss. Dele hasn't just lost a wife, he has lost the anchor of his reality. The opening of the film established a vibe of mystical certainty, that a child would come, a warrior would rise, and hunger would vanish. But as Dele kneels in the sand, the reality is far more toxic. The prophecy didn't mention the smell of copper in the air, or the way a body feels when the spark leaves it. It only mentioned the glory. This is the first great mistake of the Yagal. They believed the myth was a shield, when in reality, it was just a script for their suffering. Looking back at the beginning, the Ural Mountains are presented as a place of static survival. The Yagal are trapped in a loop of hunting the mightiest beasts, but the Manics are vanishing. The feeling of the opening is one of slow-motion extinction. When the narrator speaks of truths that do not survive the ages, he is talking about the friction between what we need to believe to stay alive and the brutal gravity of the world as it actually is. The blue-eyed child was a sign of the beginning of the end. We often mistake the start of a legend for a birth, but in the context of the Yagal, it was a funeral march. The girl was a ghost from the moment she arrived in the camp, a survivor of an attack by four-legged demons that the tribe couldn't even conceptualize. The choice to pair the death of the old mother with the resurrection of Evelate is where the film's moral rot and spiritual hope become indistinguishable. It is a transaction. This isn't a miracle, it's a trade. The texture of this scene is thick with the ghost of the old mother's sacrifice. She fulfills her final duty by handing over her remaining heartbeats to a girl who was supposed to lead the tribe into a new life. There is a deep irony in the fact that for the prophecy to be fulfilled, the one who spoke it must be erased. It suggests that the future has no room for the architects of the past. The shaman, with her soot-stained skin and her connection to the earth's vibrations, is a relic. Evelate, restored to life, is the bridge to the agrarian world that Dele's father sought. This transition creates a massive amount of psychological friction for Dele. He stands at the end of the film as a man who has broken the illusion of godhood by putting a spear through the Almighty. Yet he is still a slave to the rhythm of the spirits. He didn't bring Evelate back through his own strength or his skill with the white spear. He had to wait for a ghost to do the heavy lifting. This undermines the traditional warrior trope. It suggests that even the most capable hunter is just a leaf in the wind of larger, more ancient forces. The burden of leadership isn't in the killing. It's in the realization that you are never truly in control. The visual grime of the Egyptian civilization, or the Atlantean remnants as the lore suggests, provides a stark contrast to the purity of the mountain snow seen in the first act. The pyramids are monuments to a dead ego, built on the broken backs of tribes who once lived like the Yagal. When Dele looks at the Almighty, a figure shrouded in silk and distance, he is seeing the ultimate consequence of the hunter's ego. If you stop moving, if you stop hunting together as one, you become a static god who requires the blood of others to maintain a spark of divinity. The Almighty is the shadow version of the Old Mother. One gives life to save the future, the other takes life to preserve a dead past. The rhythm of the film's final act is a frantic escape from the static weight of the desert. When Evelate is restored, the relief felt by the characters is palpable, but it's a nervous energy. They are returning to a home that no longer exists. The mammoths are gone. Their shaman is dead. The white spear has been used to kill a man instead of a beast. The choices made by the characters throughout the journey have fundamentally altered the DNA of the Yagal. They are no longer the people we met in the opening minute. They are something new, something forged in the heat of the great sand and the shadow of the pyramids. We have to ask why the director chose to lean so heavily into the supernatural at this specific junction. By allowing the old mother to physically trade her life, the film moves away from historical fiction and into the realm of the high mythic. This choice heightens the feeling of isolation for Delay. He is the only one who truly understands the cost of their survival. The rest of the tribe sees a miracle. He sees the ghost of his mentor and the weight of a debt he can never repay. The friction of that knowledge is what makes him a leader, not the spear in his hand. The legend of the child with the blue eyes, as whispered in all four winds of the great white mountains, is ultimately a story about the death of the primitive and the birth of the burdened. The final frames of the film, where Delay looks out over his people, mirror the very first shots of the mountains. But the vibe has shifted. The majestic silence of the opening is replaced by the quiet, heavy work of planting seeds. The ghost of the hunter still lingers in the way Delay carries himself, but the rhythm of his life has changed. He is no longer chasing the manic. He is chasing the sun, waiting for the earth to provide what the spear no longer can. This chapter of their history ends not with a shout of victory, but with the realization that every legend is built on a pile of mistakes and sacrifices that the storytellers eventually choose to forget. The truth of 10,000 BC isn't found in the height of the pyramids or the length of a mammoth's tusk. It's found in the friction between a man's desire to keep his world the same and the relentless, grinding choice of time to move forward. The resurrection of Evole is the final spark of the old magic, a parting gift from a world of spirits to a world that is about to become far more mechanical, far more grounded, and infinitely more heavy. The ghost of the old mother is the last thing Delay sees before he turns his back on the gods and starts the long, dusty work of becoming a man. The burden of agriculture. The transition from the blood-soaked sand of the pyramids back to the quiet, reaching soil of the Ural Mountains is a structural rhythm that defines the true weight of Delay's journey. At the end of the film, we aren't left with a celebration of the kill, we are left with the quiet, heavy burden of the seed. Agriculture is often presented in cinema as a soft, peaceful evolution, but in the context of 10,000 BC, it is a brutal choice. It is the final death of the predator's ego. When Delay stands over the earth, he isn't just a hunter who won a war. He is a man who has accepted the ghost of his father's vision. The seeds given to him by the Naku tribe are far heavier than any spear he ever carried. They represent the end of the frantic, starving chase and the beginning of the static, grinding work of staying put. Looking back to the beginning of the film, the vibe is entirely different, yet the friction is the same. The departure of Delay's father was the original mistake of the Yagal's perception. The tribe viewed his exit as a betrayal of the blood, a cowardly flight from the hunger that was slowly hollowing out their people. But the cinematic irony is that the father wasn't running from the mammoths. He was running toward the future. He understood that the rhythm of the hunt was a dying song. The texture of the snow in those early scenes feels suffocating, a white void that offers nothing but the promise of an empty stomach. The father chose to carry the weight of being a pariah so he could find the spark of a new way to live. He traded his legacy as a bearer of the white spear for the grime of the field, a choice the Yagal were too primitive to respect. This creates an intense moral friction that defines Delay's entire character arc. He spends years under the shadow of a lie, trying to wash the imaginary rust off his family name by becoming the most aggressive hunter in the valley. He thinks the white spear is the object that will define his worth. But the director makes a fascinating choice here. The spear is never the solution. It is a relic of a world that is already extinct. When we pair the ending with the beginning, we see that the true burden wasn't the mammoth's absence, but the tribe's refusal to change their rhythm. The seeds Delay brings back are the ultimate retribution for his father's memory. They are the physical proof that the coward was actually the only one with the courage to see beyond the next kill. The texture of the Naku village, which Delay encounters in the middle of his struggle, provides the missing link in this evolutionary friction. The Naku don't just hunt, they stay. They have a connection to the earth that is mechanical and patient. This is where the spark of civilization actually resides, not in the height of the Almighty's monuments, but in the ability to feed your brothers and sisters without a death toll. The choice to include this sedentary culture is a deliberate move to undercut the action vibe of the film. It suggests that the most heroic thing a human can do is stop the cycle of violence and start the cycle of growth. The grime on the hands of the Naku is a badge of honor, a sign of a tribe that has stopped being ghosts in the forest, and a started being masters of the sun. There's a visceral feeling of change in the way Dele handles those first bags of grain. It is a moment of deep, internal friction. To accept the seed is to admit that the way of his ancestors, the way of the mighty mammoth hunt, is over. It is a surrender to a more grounded, demanding existence. The hunter's life is one of bursts of adrenaline followed by long silences. The farmer's life is a constant, rhythmic wait. By bringing agriculture to the Yagal, Dele is effectively killing the hunter in every one of them. This is the structural irony of the film's victory. They won their freedom from the Almighty, only to become slaves to the seasons and the soil. It is a different kind of burden, one that requires a more sustainable kind of strength. The director uses the ghost of the father's mission to provide the emotional closure that the spear never could. When Tik-Tik finally reveals the truth, the spark of realization in Dele's eyes changes the texture of the entire film. He realizes that his father was the first warrior of their new world. The mistake wasn't the father's exit. It was the tribe's inability to grasp a reality that wasn't built on slaughter. The white spear, which Dele eventually uses to break the Almighty's godhood, is a weapon of the old world being used to execute the last of the old world's monsters. Once the Almighty is dead, the spear is useless. It has no place in a world of seeds. The choice to show the Yagal planting at the very end is a cinematic signature of closure, a sign that the friction of the hunt has finally been resolved into the rhythm of the harvest. We have to look at the toxicity of the hunter's ego that preceded this transition. The Yagal were starving not just because the mammoths were gone, but because they were emotionally locked into a predator's vibe. They couldn't imagine a world where they didn't have to chase their survival. The burden of the prophecy was that it kept them waiting for a miracle instead of looking at the grime beneath their feet. Dele's journey across the great sand was a process of shedding that ego. He had to be beaten by the sun, chased by terror birds, and humbled by a saber-toothed tiger to realize that the human spark isn't about being the top of the food chain. It's about the choice to build a circle that includes the earth itself. The final rhythm of the film is one of quiet, heavy labor. The feeling of the ending isn't the soaring triumph of a typical blockbuster. It's the somber, resolute vibe of a funeral for a way of life. They are burying the hunter so the worker can rise. The seeds are the physical manifestation of the old mother's sacrifice. She died so they could have a future, and that future is made of dirt and water, not blood and glory. The cinematic irony is that the film sells itself as a mammoth hunting epic, but it concludes as an agrarian tragedy. The weight of the world has shifted. The mammoths are a memory, a ghost that will haunt their stories around the fire. But the seeds are the reality that will keep their children from following them into the dark. Dele stands as the architect of this new friction. He is the bridge between the rust of the old world and the spark of the new Adwai. He carries the trauma of the pyramids and the wisdom of the Naku back to a valley that still thinks in terms of spears. His burden is to convince a tribe of predators to become a tribe of stayers. The rhythm of their lives will no longer be dictated by the migrations of beasts, but by their relentless, patient choice to plant, wait, and grow. This is the ultimate subversion of the hero's journey. He didn't just come back with the girl, he came back with a new kind of work. The legend of the child with the blue eyes is now a story of the soil, whispered in the winds that no longer carry the scent of the mannack, but the heavy, promising smell of the rain and the rising grain. The god who bled the friction of a spearhead meeting the silk-covered chest of a supposed immortal is the most visceral sound in the entire runtime of this prehistoric epic. Near the climax, the Almighty, this untouchable golden ghost of a king, finally loses the protection of his own myth. For the duration of the grueling trek across the great sand, he has been a weight of absolute crushing dread. He was the force that took the blue-eyed child, the entity that turned the Manaks into beasts of burden, and the reason the Ural Mountains felt like a sanctuary that was slowly being erased by a more mechanical and greedy era. But when Dele stands before him, the vibe shifts from cosmic horror to a pathetic, grounded reality. The Almighty isn't a star child or a spirit of the sun. He is just a man who understood that if you stay high enough above the grime and the common struggle, people will forget you are made of flesh and bone. The director makes a fascinating and subversive choice to render this god as a frail, almost translucent relic of a lost world. He represents the rust of a civilization that has overstayed its welcome on the planet. When he bleeds, the illusion of his divinity doesn't just crack, it evaporates. The texture of this scene is one of absolute demystification. We have spent the entire movie watching Delay grapple with the Old Mother's prophecies, fearing the four-legged demons, and treating the world as a place governed by unseen, terrifying spirits. But here, the God King is brought down by the very thing he tried to enslave, a simple, honest hunter who has decided he no longer believes in the distance. This is the ultimate friction of the film's climax. It is the collision between the high-tech ghost of a forgotten past and the raw, visceral spark of a human future. To truly understand the weight of this kill, we have to look back at the point when the coalition of tribes first gazes upon the pyramids on the horizon. At that point, the feeling is one of crushing inferiority. The Yagal look at the stone monuments and the way the mammoths are being forced into grueling mechanical labor, and they see a world that appears to have conquered the earth itself. The Almighty's divinity was built entirely on this specific texture of intimidation. By building structures that scrape the clouds and surrounding himself with silk and absolute silence, he ensured that the tribes felt like ghosts in their own era. The god is an emotional lie that depends on the slaves staying in the grime while he stays in the artificial light of his temple. But Delaya's choice to look him in the eye is the first act of the rebellion. He realizes that divinity is just a trick of the perspective, an illusion of distance. There is a profound moral friction in the Almighty's use of the Manax. For the Yagal, the mammoth was a sacred beast, a provider of life that was hunted with a heavy heart, respect, and ritual. In the Almighty's city, the mammoth is a cog in a machine. It is a soul-crushing mistake that reflects the Almighty's entire philosophy. Everything in the world is a tool for his own legacy. This is the toxicity of the God King. He has replaced the human connection of the tribe with the cold, static efficiency of an empire. When Dele sees his fellow hunters treated like animals, the spark of his rage is fueled by more than just the rescue of Evelyn. It is a rejection of a world where life is measured in how much stone it can move before it breaks into the dust. The Almighty is likely a remnant of Atlantis, a ghost of a high culture that has drifted into a parasitic existence. He uses the knowledge of stars and mathematics to maintain a grip on the primitive minds of the tribes, using the sun as a weapon of psychological war. But the director's intent is to show that no amount of advanced spark or hidden knowledge can survive the friction of a desperate heart. The God King's mistake was thinking that distance made him safe. He thought that by being untouchable he could never be wounded. But Delay doesn't play by the god's rhythm. He plays by the rhythm of the hunter. He waits for the opening, he ignores the distractions of the silk, and he finds the heart of the beast. The blood that spills from the Almighty is the same copper color as any other man's. The divinity was just a robe that was long overdue for a shredding. This moment of violence is the film's most honest observation about power. Power is a mask that requires the fear of the observer to stay in place. As soon as Delay throws the white spear, he is essentially saying that the god is not real. The situation at the pyramid becomes one of absolute friction between two different versions of humanity. One version believes in the weight of stone and the ego of monuments. The other believes in the spark of the group, the survival of the tribe. The Almighty's death is a release of the psychological grime that had been clogging the spirits of the desert people for generations. They were held captive not just by chains, but by the idea that they were fighting something that couldn't bleed. The cinematic irony of using a primitive spear to kill a god who possesses advanced knowledge is the film's most powerful rhythm. It suggests that no amount of architectural spark can survive the friction of a simple, honest truth. The Almighty's mistake was thinking that he could turn humans into cogs. He thought that by taking their freedom, he could take their spark. But the rebellion that Delay starts is fueled by the very thing the Almighty tried to erase: the human need for connection. The grime on the slave's hands becomes the spark that burns down the city of silk. The mammoths, once used as tools for the ego of the god, become the stampede that destroys his monuments. The ghost of the hunter's world returns to trample the arrogance of the civilized one. There is a deep internal shadow in the way the high priest looks at the Almighty. Even the followers know the divinity is a hollow lie. They are just too invested in the rhythm of the power to admit it. They are participants in a collective mistake. When Delay punctures that lie, he isn't just freeing the slaves. He is forcing the entire culture to look at the grime they have tried to hide under golden robes for centuries. The weight of the pyramids will eventually be reclaimed by the sand, because they were built on a foundation of moral rust. A civilization that requires its gods to be untouchable is a civilization that is already dying from the inside out. Dela's journey is a process of absolute demystification. He starts as a boy who fears the Old Mother's prophecies and, ends as a man who understands that even the most powerful entity in the world is subject to the friction of reality. The spark of his leadership doesn't come from being a chosen one in some mystical book. It comes from the choice to see the Almighty for what he actually is, a man who forgot the weight of his own humanity. The God who bled is the ultimate symbol of the transition from the era of myth to the era of man. It is the resolution of the friction between the old magical world and the new, grounded one. Delay returns to his people not with a crown of gold, but with the knowledge that there are no gods, only people who draw larger circles, and people who use those circles to trap others. When the spear finally hits home, it isn't just a physical wound. It is the puncture of a massive historical ego. The Almighty dies as a man, and in that moment, the pyramids stop being temples and start being just piles of heavy rock. The friction between the hunter and the god is resolved in favor of the hunter, because the hunter is grounded in the grime of the earth. The Almighty was a ghost trying to pretend he was a spark, but Delay is the spark that actually burns. Returning to the mountains, Delay carries the weight of this truth. He knows that the world is no longer governed by distant gods, but by the choices of those who draw the circle around their brothers and sisters. The God who bled is a reminder that any divinity that requires a chain to sustain itself is just a lie waiting for a hunter's spear to find its mark. The predator's debt, the texture of survival, is rarely about who has the sharpest flint. It's about who understands the rhythm of a debt. In the heart of the journey, a film plunges us into a pit of absolute grime and liquid fear. Delay is no longer the hunter. He's just another creature trapped in the mud, shivering under a sky that offers nothing but a relentless, cold weight. The situation is a masterclass in atmospheric isolation. There is a saber-toothed tiger, the spear-tooth, pinned beneath a fallen tree, its growl a vibration of pure, primal friction. This isn't a scene about a man and a beast. It's a scene about two ghosts of a dying world realizing they are in the same hole. The director's choice here to strip Delay of his spear and his tribe, leaving him only with a raw feeling of his own vulnerability, is the pivot point for the entire movie. In this dark, wet void, Delay makes a choice that defies the logic of his era. He sees the predator, the very embodiment of the shadow that haunts his people, and he doesn't see an enemy. He sees a burden shared. The friction of the water against the mud and the desperate, sharp breath of the cat creates a vibe of shared extinction. Delay frees the beast. He doesn't do it because he's a saint. He does it because he realizes that the old rhythm of kill or be killed is what's actually hollowing out the world. By freeing the predator, he creates a spark of connection that is more powerful than any weapon. He speaks to the tiger, making a pact that sounds like a whisper but carries the weight of a monumental shift in human consciousness. He asks for mercy, and in doing so, he invests in a currency that most of his people would consider a mistake. During the frantic, chaotic heat of the final rescue mission, the vibe has shifted from the cold mud of the pit to the burning grime of the pyramids. Delay is now the predator, hunting the slavers who have turned his life into a series of scars. But the internal shadow he carries is different now. He isn't just a man seeking blood. He is a leader whose authority was forged in that original act of mercy. The cinematic irony of his journey is that he only gained the power to lead a coalition because he refused to kill a cornered animal. When the spear tooth reappeared earlier at the Naku village, it didn't just save Delay's life, it gave him the divine spark he needed to convince the other tribes that he was the one. The tiger is the physical manifestation of the debt, a ghost of nature that validates his leadership through a silent, predatory respect. There is a deep moral friction in the way Delay navigates the final battle. He is in the thick of the rust and the blood, using his bow to thin the ranks of the four-legged demons. He is executing the very rhythm of violence he once tried to escape. But the weight of his actions feels different because of the pit. He knows what it's like to be the one under the tree, the one waiting for the spear to fall. This gives his character a texture that the Almighty, his golden distant rival, lacks. The Almighty builds pyramids on a foundation of human rust. Delay builds a rebellion on a foundation of mercy. The director's intent seems to be to show that the only way to break a civilization of chains is to first break the chain of predatory instinct. The feeling of the saber-tooth's presence throughout the middle act is one of a lingering ghost. It's always there in the back of Delay's mind, a reminder that the world is more than just meat and flint. When the tiger stands before the Naku, refusing to eat the man who saved it, the friction between the tribes dissolves into awe. This is the moment where Delay's mistake in the pit becomes his greatest asset. It is a choice that pays a massive dividend. The tribes don't follow Delay because he is the strongest hunter. They follow him because he possesses a spark of something they have never seen. A connection to the raw, untamed forces of the earth that isn't built on slaughter. We have to analyze the toxicity of the world Delay is trying to save. Every tribe he meets has been hollowed out by fear. They are living as ghosts in the jungle, hiding from the demons and the birds, waiting for the end. The rhythm of their lives is one of static terror. Delay breaks this rhythm by introducing the concept of the debt. By showing that a predator can be an ally, he suggests that the world doesn't have to be a place of constant, grinding friction. He offers a new vibe, one of unity. But the weight of this unity is heavy. It requires him to step into the role of the ultimate predator in the final act, taking on the burden of the kill so that his people can finally stop being hunted. The cinematic irony reaches its peak when Delay uses the tactics of a hunter to take down the civilization of the God King. He uses the mammoths, the jungle, and the very grit of the desert to clog the gears of the Almighty's machine. The spear-toothed tiger is the spiritual anchor for this. It represents the untamable spark of nature that the Almighty tried to turn into a mechanical tool. By freeing the tiger, Delay aligned himself with the natural world. By enslaving the mammoths, the Almighty aligned himself with the rust of progress. The final battle is the ultimate friction between these two paths. The predator's debt is finally settled, not just with a life saved, but with a world liberated from the mechanical weight of the pyramids. The director uses the saber-tooth as a mirror for Delay's own internal shadow. In the pit, Delay was looking at himself, trapped, wounded, and desperate. By choosing mercy, he was choosing to believe that he too deserved to be more than just a victim of the era. The texture of the final act is the result of that self-forgiveness. When he stands in the grime of the Egyptian city, he is a man who has integrated the predator within him. He is no longer afraid of the beast because he has mastered the rhythm of its heart. The dead is a circle that finally closes when the Almighty is brought down by the very tribes who were once considered nothing more than prey. The feeling of the ending is a somber resolution of this friction. The tiger retreats into the shadows, a ghost that no longer needs to hunt the man. The debt is paid. The spark of the new world, the world of seeds and stairs, can finally begin because the predator has stepped aside. Delay carries the weight of this relationship back to the mountains. He knows that his survival wasn't a matter of luck. It was a matter of a choice made in a mud-filled hole. The predator's debt is the ultimate subversion of the action-adventure genre. It suggests that the most effective way to defeat an empire of stone is to first show mercy to a creature of bone. Delay is the architect of a new moral rhythm. He understood that the only currency that survives the shifting sands of time is the mercy we show when we are at our most vulnerable. The rust of the Almighty's world is a warning of what happens when we forget the debt we owe to the life around us. The spark of the Agal's future is found in the grime of the pit, in the friction of a man's hand lifting a tree off a cat's leg. It is a quiet, heavy truth that defines the entire journey. The legend of the child with the blue eyes is at its core. A story about a man who realized that the only way to stop being hunted is to stop being a hunter and start being a brother to everything that breathes. The white spear fallacy. The white spear is the most dangerous object in the Ural Mountains, not because of its flint tip, but because of the spiritual friction it creates for anyone unlucky enough to hold it. Early on, the film presents us with an absolute, emotional lie. Delay stands over a fallen mammoth, his hands shaking, his chest heaving with the frantic rhythm of a boy who has just accidentally become a man. The tribe erupts in a vibe of pure, unadulterated triumph, seeing him as the prophesied champion. But the texture of the scene is caked in the grime of a secret. Delay didn't out-hunt the beast, he didn't outmaneuver the legend. He simply got his hand caught in the net. The mammoth killed itself on his spear through the sheer, random friction of the struggle. This choice by the director to make the chosen one a product of a mechanical mistake is the film's most subversive, internal shadow. The white spear is a burden disguised as a prize. It represents the collective ego of the Agal, a tribe so desperate for a savior that they are willing to ignore the rust on the story. When Delay accepts the spear and the woman who comes with it, he isn't just taking on a leadership role, he's taking on a toxic weight that almost immediately leads to the destruction of his world. The vibe of the celebration is hollow. The high-value irony here is that the very object meant to protect the tribe, the symbol of their greatest hunter, is exactly what makes them a target for the four-legged demons. By claiming a destiny he didn't earn, Belle creates a moral friction that haunts every step of the middle act. He is a ghost of a hero, wearing the skin of a champion while carrying the internal shadow of a liar. In the final act, where the air is thick with the dust of the pyramids and the metallic scent of a dying civilization, Belle is no longer in the cold blue light of the mountains. He is in the blinding golden grime of the almighty city. The white spear has traveled across the great sand, no longer a ceremonial weight, but a tool for regicide. The rhythm of the film at this point is a frantic, desperate surge. Belle is using the spear to puncture the illusion of godhood. The director's intent is to show the spear's final evolution. It started as an accidental snag in a net, and it ends as the physical spark that ignites a global rebellion. But the spear itself remains a cold, dead thing. It is the person holding it, the man who has finally accepted the burden of his father's seeds over the hunter's blood, who gives the object its true power. The moral friction of the white spear fallacy is that we want our heroes to be perfect, but they are usually just the ones who couldn't let go of the net. Belle's internal shadow is most visible when he tries to give the spear back to Tick-a-Tick. He recognizes the emotional lie. He understands that a symbol built on a mistake is a fragile thing. But Tick-Tick, the mentor whose own heart is burdened by the ghost of Belle's father, refuses to take it. The choice to leave the spear in Belle's hands is a choice to force him into greatness through the sheer weight of expectation. It's a brutal kind of mentorship. It suggests that you don't become a leader by being the best. You become a leader by being the one who has to carry the most heavy lie until it eventually becomes a truth. The texture of the final act is a masterclass in the deconstruction of the warrior vibe. The spear is finally used for its true purpose: to kill a man who thinks he is a god. The Almighty, shrouded in silken distance, is brought down by the same flint and wood that killed the mammoth. The cinematic irony is that the spear, which the Yagal thought was a tool for hunting beasts to fill their stomachs, was actually a tool for hunting tyrants to free their souls. The mistake of the tribe was thinking the spear was about food. The father knew the spear was about freedom. Once the Almighty is dead, the spear is obsolete. It is a relic of an era of blood that is being replaced by an era of seeds. There is a visceral feeling of release when the spear finally leaves Belle's hand for the last time. The internal shadow that has been gnawing at him since the accidental kill is finally resolved. He has paid the debt of the lie with the spark of a revolution. But the cost is staggering. The old mother is dead, Tick-Tick is gone, and the Yagal are no longer hunters. The white spear fallacy teaches us that power is never a gift. It is a loan with a high interest rate of grief. The director uses the spear to critique the very idea of the epic hero. Belle isn't great because he held the spear. He is great because he survived the weight of it. The grime of the pyramids provides a stark contrast to the white snow where the spear was first claimed. In the mountains, the spear was a spark of hope. In the city, it is a ghost of retribution. When the Almighty threatens evil, Belle doesn't rely on the prophecy of the spear. He relies on the friction of his own desperation. He throws the weapon not as a chosen one, but as a man who is tired of carrying the burden. This is the moment where the legend is finally discarded for the truth. The spear breaks the silk, it breaks the god, and it breaks the cycle of the Yagal's static existence. The feeling of the ending is a somber, grounded vibe. The spear is gone, likely buried in the sand or left in the ruins of a broken city. It has no place in the world of agriculture. The burden of agriculture replaces the fallacy of the spear. The Yagal trade, the adrenaline of the hunt for the patient, grinding work of the harvest. The director's choice to end on the seeds instead of the weapon is the final signature of the film's philosophy. It suggests that civilization isn't built on the things we kill. It's built on the things we have the patience to grow. The white spear was just a temporary spark in the long, dark night of human struggle. Belle returns to the valley as a man who has integrated his internal shadow. He no longer needs the object to define his worth. He carries the weight of his father's legacy in his hands, in the form of grain, not on his shoulder in the form of a weapon. The friction between the hunter he was forced to be and the leader he chose to become is finally resolved. The legend of the child with the blue eyes isn't a story about a spear. It's a story about the man who was strong enough to survive the lie of the spear long enough to find a better way to live. Ultimately, the white spear was a mistake that became a miracle. It was a snag in a net that turned into a puncture in a god's heart. The rhythm of 10,000 BC is dictated by this single heavy object. But the melody of the film is found in the silence after the spear is dropped. The ghost of the hunter's era retreats into the mountains. leaving behind a tribe that has finally learned that the true spark of humanity isn't found in the point of a weapon, but in the circle we draw around our brothers and sisters when the hunt finally ends. The blue-eyed lie. The blue eyes of Evelett are not a gift of nature. They are a biological glitch that a desperate tribe mistook for a divine spark. When the child is first brought into the Yagal camp, the vibe is one of shivering, primordial awe. She is the lone survivor of a massacre, a ghost from a world the mountain people cannot even imagine. To the old mother, the shaman whose mind is caked in the grime of ancient spirits. Those eyes are a sign, a literal map to a future where hunger is a forgotten rhythm. But the director's choice here is a subtle toxic mistake. By elevating a physical anomaly to a holy status, the tribe essentially paints a target on the girl's back. Beauty, in the context of 10,000 BC, is a mark for destruction. The very thing that makes her a blessing to the Yagal makes her a prize for the four-legged demons. Through the grit and the blood toward the end, where the air is thick with the dust of the pyramids and delay, the oppressive weight of the Almighty's ego, delay has crossed the world, not for a person, but for the weight of the prophecy those eyes represent. The blue-eyed child is now a woman in chains, standing in the shadow of monuments that scrape the sun. The cinematic irony is visceral. Her uniqueness, the very spark that was supposed to save her people, is the exact reason she is a slave. The Almighty, a ghost of an even older civilization, sees her as a mirror of his own supposed divinity. To him, the blue eyes are a relic of Atlantis, a sign that the gods haven't entirely left the earth. This is the ultimate friction of her existence. She is a human being treated as an architectural detail in someone else's myth. The vibe of the introduction is caked in a heavy, blue-tinted cold. The child is small, vulnerable, and terrified. But the old mother doesn't see a child. She sees a script. She sees the child as a promise to a boy named Dile, tethering their souls together before they even understand the rhythm of their own hearts. This is the emotional toxicity of the prophecy. It strips away their choice. Dile isn't allowed to just love Evelett. He is burdened with the responsibility of being her warrior. Their relationship is forged in the rust of a religious expectation, a choice made by a shaman who is more interested in the survival of the tribe than the happiness of the individuals. The blue eyes are a chain that Dile has been wearing since he was a boy, a visual spark that demands a lifetime of sacrifice. When we look at the friction in the Pyramid City, the blue eyes have become a source of absolute dread. The warlord, a man whose soul is void of predatory instinct, is obsessed with her not because of who she is, but because of what she signifies. She is a status symbol. The director uses this to highlight the mechanical nature of human greed. In the mountains, her eyes were a spark of hope. In the desert, they are a currency of power. The texture of the film shifts from the soft white snow of the opening to the abrasive golden grime of the climax, reflecting the way her beauty has been ground down by the relentless pursuit of those who want to own the legend. There is a profound internal shadow in the way Dile looks at Evelett throughout the journey. He is chasing a ghost. He is chasing the feeling of that first night in the mountains. But the person he finds at the pyramids is someone who has been hollowing out under the weight of her own significance. She has become a vessel for the collective trauma of multiple tribes. The choice to make her the center of the Almighty's obsession is the film's most grinding mistake. It suggests that her value is purely aesthetic and symbolic, a high-value prize that justifies 1,000 deaths. This is the moral friction at the heart of the story. The legend requires her to be a victim so that Dile can be a hero. The feeling of the pyramids is one of static, golden rot. The blue eyes of Evelett are the only cool color in a world of burning sand and oppressive stone. This visual spark is used to guide the audience's eye, but it also underscores her isolation. She is an anomaly in the Almighty City, a freak of nature that he wants to hoard. The Almighty himself is a ghost of a god, a man hiding behind silk and distance because he knows that his divinity is just a trick of the light. He needs Evelett because her eyes are the only real thing in his empire of illusions. They are a physical spark of the old magic that he is trying to replicate through the mechanical labor of 1,000 slaves. The cinematic irony reaches its peak when Dile finally breaks the cycle. He doesn't save her because of the prophecy. He saves her because of the friction of his own grief. When she is killed and then resurrected, the blue eyes are the first thing to return to life. But the vibe has changed. The blue-eyed lie has been exposed. The prophecy is over. The old mother is dead, and the Almighty is a bleeding corpse in the sand. The weight of being a sign has finally been lifted. When they return to the mountains, her eyes are no longer a mark for destruction. They are just eyes. The spark of the myth has been replaced by the rhythm of reality. The director's intent in pairing the Act 1 introduction with the Act 3 climax is to show the crushing cost of being special. Evelade is a survivor of 3 different extinctions: her own tribe, the Yagal's peace, and the Almighty's city. Every time, her blue eyes were the reason she was spared and the reason she was hunted. It is a toxic cycle of predatory interest. The burden of her beauty is a shadow that only vanishes when the civilization of monuments is replaced by the civilization of seeds. The agrarian future doesn't care about the color of your eyes. It only cares about the grime on your hands and the strength of your back. The legend of the child with the blue eyes is whispered in the winds of the great white mountains. It is ultimately a story about the danger of symbols. The Yagal almost died waiting for a girl to save them. Delay almost died trying to be the warrior the prophecy demanded. The friction of the entire film is the struggle to move past the legend and find the human being underneath. Initially, she was a vessel. In the city, she was a prize. But in the final frames of the film, she is finally just a woman, standing in the dirt, helping her people plant for a future that has no room for ghosts or gods. The blue-eyed lie is the emotional lie that says some of us are born for glory, while others are born for the grime. Delay and Evelade had to walk through the fire to realize that the spark of their life was never in the prophecy, but in the choice to keep walking when the spirits were silent. The weight of the world shifted from the blue eyes of a girl to the brown soil of a field. The rest of the old myth has been cleared away, leaving only the texture of a new, grounded existence. The eyes are still blue, but the burden is gone, buried in the sand along with the pyramids and the Almighty's broken silk. The desert of ambition. The sun is a predatory weight in the middle act of this epic, a blinding orange eye that watches the friction of human ambition grind against the absolute void of the great sand. At this point, the vibe of the film shifts from the claustrophobic, wet green of the jungle to an expansive, terrifying heat. Delay is no longer just a man chasing a girl. He is the center of a growing rhythm. A coalition of tribes who have all been hollowed out by the same ghost of oppression. The situation is one of total environmental hostility. The desert doesn't care about the prophecy of the blue-eyed child or the legacy of the white spear. It only cares about the moisture in your breath and the strength of your choice to take the next step. This is where the primitive ego of the hunter is scorched away, replaced by the heavy, dry weight of a leader's responsibility. The director's choice to transition into this massive golden grit is a masterstroke of visual isolation. By the time we reach the final approach, the urgency has reached a fever pitch. The mountain of the gods is no longer a rumor whispered around a mountain fire. It is a shimmering, jagged reality on the horizon. The friction here is between the vastness of the world and the smallness of the men trying to conquer it. Delay is leading thousands of warriors, yet the feeling is one of profound loneliness. Every tribe he has picked up along the way, the Naku, the Huda, the Kula, is a different shadow of the same grief. They are all walking toward a sun that blinds them, chasing a spark of hope that looks increasingly like a mirage. The desert is a physical manifestation of the impossible scale of their mission. The internal shadow of Delay is most visible in the way he looks at the North Star, or Uruwana, to guide their path. The North Star is a cold, distant spark that offers direction but no comfort. There is a deep cinematic irony in using a celestial body to find a slave pit. The hunter, who used to look at the stars to track the Manak, is now using them to track a god. This shift in the rhythm of his life is the true burden of his ambition. He has drawn a circle around not just his woman, but around every soul the desert has tried to erase. The weight of those lives is a grind that threatens to break him before he even reaches the pyramids. He is a man who has traded the simple blue shadows of his home for the complex burning grime of a war he wasn't born to fight. The texture of the desert trek is caked in the salt of sweat and the rust of old fears. When the tribes gather at the edge of the sand, the director emphasizes the diversity of their pain. They don't speak the same language, but they share the same friction. Chasing the four-legged demons across this shifting void is a choice that borders on madness. The demons represent a civilization that has mastered the rhythm of the desert, using horses and advanced logistics to outpace the primitive world. The Yagal and their allies are trying to bridge that gap through sheer, stubborn friction. They are walking where horses gallop, and that mistake of physics is only overcome by the spark of their collective rage. Roland Emmerich uses the scale of the desert to prepare the audience for the scale of the pyramids. The desert is the preamble to the God King's arrogance. If the sand is a weight that can bury a man, the pyramids are a weight that can bury a culture. Chasing ambition into this environment is a toxic process. It requires Delier to become something more than human, something colder and more resolute. He has to ignore the bodies that fall in the heat. He has to ignore the ghost of the old mother's warning that this journey might be their last. The ambition to save Evelet has morphed into an ambition to topple a world, and the desert is the forge where that new, harder spark is created. The feeling of the trek is one of relentless, grinding motion. There is no shade, no respite, and no turning back. The choice to leave the Naku village behind was the point of no return. In the village, there was the spark of hospitality and the rhythm of a grounded life. In the desert, there is only the ghost of the enemy ahead and the weight of the sand behind. The cinematic irony of the trek is that the further they go, the more they lose of themselves. They are being stripped down to their most basic elements: thirst, anger, and the need for retribution. The grime of the journey is a badge of their endurance, a physical layer of the struggle that hides the vulnerability beneath. We have to analyze the choice of the director to make the desert so beautiful, yet so deadly. The golden light is breathtaking, a shimmering spark of cinematic grandeur. But that beauty is an emotional lie. It hides the fact that every mile is a mistake for a body built for the mountains. The friction of the sand in their joints and the heat in their lungs is the reality of their ambition. They are out of place, out of time, and out of their depth. This is the mirror effect in action. The ambition of the tribes to regain their freedom is meeting the ambition of the Almighty to build an eternal monument. Both are trying to leave a mark on the sand, a choice that the desert will eventually resolve by erasing everything. The mountain of the gods appearing on the horizon is the moment where the ambition of the trek meets the reality of the war. The pyramids are a static weight, a challenge to the nomadic rhythm of the tribes. They are built of stone and ego, things that do not move with the wind. Dela's ambition has brought him to the heart of the machine, the place where the spark of human life is turned into the grime of labor. The friction of the coalition meeting the empire is the climax of the Act 2 struggle. The desert was the test of their will. The pyramids will be the test of their soul. The final rhythm of the desert phase is a somber, determined beat. The tribes are no longer a collection of strangers. They are a single, heavy weight moving toward the sun. The choice to follow Dela has turned them all into ghosts of their former selves, haunted by the people they left behind, and driven by the spark of the person they might become if they survive. The desert of ambition is the ultimate filter. It keeps the weak and the hesitant, leaving only the ones whose hearts have been hardened into flint. Dele stands at the front of this wave. A man who has learned that the only way to survive a sun that blinds you is to become a fire that burns even brighter. Ultimately, the desert trek is about the death of the primitive and the birth of the strategic. Dele is no longer hunting by instinct, he is hunting by calculation. He is using the stars, the tribes, and the very friction of the environment to build a weapon against the Almighty. The weight of the sand has taught him that survival isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about being the one who refuses to stop when the world turns into a void. The spark of his leadership is found in the grime of the trek, in the choice to keep walking when the horizon offers nothing but heat and ghosts. The legend of the child with the blue eyes is now a story of the sand, a rhythm of thousands of feet marching toward a golden, toxic monument that they are finally ready to tear down. The shaman's cold breath, the air in the old mother's sanctuary, is a stagnant weight, caked with the grime of centuries of superstition. In the mountain village, the vibe is one of shivering, ritualistic isolation. Dele stands before a woman who is less a person and more a ghost inhabiting a shell of leather and bone. This is the source of the Yagal's spiritual friction. The old mother, the last of her kind, doesn't offer comfort. She offers a cold, reaching breath of the future that chokes the present. Her prophecy about the blue-eyed child is a choice to anchor the tribe's survival to a mystical spark that requires absolute obedience. To the primitive mind, this isn't just a story, it's the only map they have. But the texture of this guidance is abrasive. It demands that the tribe stop looking at the ground and start looking for signs in the stars and the guts of animals. When the battle for the pyramids is over and the sun is finally setting on the Almighty's ego, the final transaction occurs. Evelet is dead, and the world feels hollow, a silent void in the middle of a desert that has already drunk too much blood. This is where the shaman's cold breath reveals its true cost. The old mother, miles away in the frozen mountains, gives up her remaining spark. It's a rhythmic exchange that defies the logic of the mechanical world. She dies so that Evelate can wake up. The director's choice to make this a literal, physical trade, a life for a life, strips away the miracle and replaces it with the grime of a debt. Spirits in 10,000 BC don't give gifts, they make trades. Looking back during the frantic run through the snow, the feeling is one of being chased by the very fate the old mother spoke of. The mammoths are gone, and the four-legged demons are no longer a dream. They are the rust on the horizon. The friction between the tribes' desire to stay and the shaman's demand that they follow the signs creates a visceral tension. Delay is running not just for survival, but to outpace a shadow that has been cast over him since his birth. The old mother's breath is always on the back of his neck, a cold reminder that his life is not his own. He is a tool of the prophecy, a spark meant to burn out so the tribe can see a new dawn. The moral friction of the shamanistic authority is that it requires a total surrender of the self. When Dela is preparing for his journey, he is effectively becoming a ghost of his own desires. He isn't going for love, though that is the emotional lie he tells himself. He is going because the spirits have dictated a rhythm he cannot ignore. The internal shadow of the old mother is most visible in her isolation. She is a relic of a Neanderthal past, a being whose connection to the earth's friction is so deep that she can no longer function in the world of men. She's a burden the tribe carries, a source of wisdom that feels like a curse. The texture of the resurrection is thick with spiritual grime. When Evelate gasps back into existence, the blue eyes reflecting the desert sky, it isn't a moment of pure joy. It's a moment of profound rhythmic irony. The old mother is dead, her breath finally still in the cold mountains. The debt is paid. The cinematic choice to show her body slumping over as Evelate rises is a visceral reminder of the primal logic of the ancient world. One life must be extinguished for another to be ignited. The legend isn't free. It's bought with the spark of the only person who truly understood the future. We have to analyze the toxicity of this spiritual dependency. The Agal were incapable of making their own choices because they were always waiting for the old mother to speak to the fathers. They were living in a static loop of fear and expectation. Dela's journey was an attempt to break that friction, to find a way that didn't rely on the cold breath of a ghost. But even in his rebellion against the Almighty, he was still dancing to the shaman's tune. The final irony is that the Agarian future he brings back to the valley is only possible because the old magical world committed suicide to let him have it. The feeling of the film's conclusion is one of heavy, somber relief. The spark of the old mother has vanished, replaced by the rhythm of the seasons and the toil of the soil. The mountains are no longer a place of prophecy, they are just a place of survival. The director's intent was to show that for humanity to move forward, it had to stop being governed by the ghosts of the past. The shaman's cold breath was the final barrier between the primitive and the civilized, and its fading is the most important event in the film. The high-authority commentary here is that the prehistoric world is an emotional lie that suggests spirits are real, but they are also a burden. They don't make life easier. They make it more heavy. They demand a physical cost for every mystical spark. Dela returns to a home that is quieter, more grounded, and infinitely more grounded in the grime of the earth. The old mother is gone, buried in the snow, and with her goes the weight of the prophecy. All that remains is the friction of the plow and the patience of the seed. The legend of the child with the blue eyes is now a story told by Baku around a campfire, a memory of a time when the world was filled with spirits and demons. But the vibe has shifted. The listeners aren't shivering in fear. They are just listening. The cold breath has warmed. The spirits have retreated into the rust of history. Dylan and Evelate stand at the center of this new, rounded rhythm, survivors of a prophecy that almost devoured them. They are no longer the puppets of a shaman. They are the architects of a harvest. The trade is complete. The ghost has been laid to rest, and the spark of human will is finally allowed to burn on its own terms. Ultimately, the shaman's cold breath is a story about the transition from the magical to the mechanical. It is the friction between the need for signs and the need for seeds. The old mother was the last link to a world that functioned through sacrifice and vibration, and her death is the final punctuation mark on that era. Dela's victory wasn't in killing the God King, it was in surviving the spirits. He is the one who walked out of the cave, through the jungle, across the sand, and back to a valley where he can finally breathe air that isn't cold with the breath of a ghost. The slaver's rhythm, the transition from the organic pulse of a mammoth hunt to the mechanical, clicking rhythm of human greed, is the most jarring friction in this prehistoric epic. In the opening, the Agal are still living in a world of shared breath and visceral survival. Their life is dictated by the migrations of the Manak, a cycle of existence that is bloody but honest. However, the vibe is already caked in a nervous grime. The mammoths are arriving later and later, and the hunger is beginning to hollow out the tribe's spirit. The director's choice to start the film here is a subtle observation of a culture on the brink of a mistake. They think their biggest threat is an empty stomach, but they have no concept of the cold, systematic weight that is about to gallop into their valley. Later, the rhythm of the film has been completely hijacked by the industrial-scale greed of the Almighty. The pyramids are not just buildings. They are a mechanical signature of an era that has forgotten how to be human. When we see the mammoths in chains used as engines to drag massive blocks of stone up artificial slopes, the cinematic irony is staggering. The beast that was once a provider of life for the Yagal is now a slave to a ghost of a civilization. This is the ultimate toxic friction of 10,000 BC. The Almighty has taken the visceral, spiritual hunt and turned it into a cold, grinding production line. Human beings are no longer brothers and sisters, they are cogs, and the weight of their labor is what fuels the God King's spark of divinity. Looking back at the initial attack of the four-legged demons, the feeling was one of chaotic, predatory terror. But by the time Belle reaches the pyramids, he realizes that the chaos was actually a very precise rhythm. The slavers didn't just kill, they harvested. They were looking for the able-bodied, the unique, the blue-eyed. This is the mechanical nature of their oppression. They look at a tribe and see resources to be exploited, not a culture to be respected. The internal shadow of the warlord is most visible in this cold efficiency. He doesn't hate the Yagal. He simply doesn't recognize them as people. To him, they are just the grime that will eventually become the foundation of his master's monument. The moral friction of the final act is the realization that the Almighty is building a world of rust. Pyramids are static. They are dead stone designed to defy time, but they require a constant influx of living blood to grow. The choice to show the mammoths working in the heat is a visual spark that underscores the Almighty's arrogance. He has tried to conquer the very rhythm of nature. In the mountains, the mammoth hunt was a moment of connection between the predator and the prey. In the desert, it is a moment of absolute hollowing out. The beasts look tired, their spirits as broken as the men standing next to them. This is the slaver's rhythm, a repetitive, soul-killing beat that replaces the spark of life with the weight of the stone. The director uses the scale of the pyramids to dwarf the human struggle. The Yagal look like ants against the backdrop of the God King's ambition. This choice heightens the isolation of Belle and his coalition. They aren't just fighting men. They are fighting a system. Slavery is presented here as a virus of the spirit, a mistake of the ego that suggests one man's legacy is worth 1,000 men's lives. The texture of the pyramid site is abrasive, filled with the dust of broken rock and the salt of sweat. It is a place where the human spark is systematically extinguished to maintain the Almighty's golden illusion. We have to analyze the cinematic irony of the white spear in this environment. In the valley, the spear was a tool for the hunt. At the pyramids, it becomes a tool for sabotage. Dila doesn't just use it to kill, he uses it to disrupt the rhythm of the machine. By starting a rebellion among the slaves, he introduces a new, chaotic friction into the Almighty's static world. The slaves have been forced into a rhythm of submission, but Belle offers them a rhythm of rage. The feeling of the final battle is the collision of these two beats. The mechanical efficiency of the God King's forces versus the visceral, desperate spark of the tribes who just want to go home. The internal shadow of the Almighty is his belief that he has escaped the grime of mortality. He sits in his temple, hidden behind silk and distance, convinced that he has mastered the stars and the sand. But his divinity is a burden that requires constant maintenance. He's the ultimate ghost of a dead era, trying to build a cage for a world that is already moving past him. The mistake of his civilization was thinking that stone could stop the wind. The pyramids are already being reclaimed by the sand even as they are being built, a silent retribution for the blood spilled in their name. The vibe of the final rebellion is a masterclass in structural irony. The very mammoths that were used to build the pyramids are the ones who ultimately helped tear them down. When the stampede begins, The rhythm of the machine is replaced by the rhythm of the wild. The mammoths are no longer cogs. They are the visceral spark of the earth's fury. This is the moment where the slaver's rhythm is finally broken. The stone blocks that were so painstakingly dragged up the slopes become weapons of destruction. The Almighty's monuments are revealed as fragile things, built on a foundation of moral rust that cannot survive the friction of 1,000 angry voices. Delay stands at the center of this chaos, a man who has learned that the only way to defeat a mechanical enemy is to be absolutely, viscerally human. He doesn't lead the rebellion with a complex strategy. He leads it with the spark of his own grief. He reminds the slaves that they aren't cogs. He reminds them of the families they left behind, the mountain air they haven't breathed in years, and the weight of the chains they no longer have to carry. The slaver's rhythm is a lie that depends on the slaves forgetting who they are. Delay is the ghost of their memory, returning to remind them that they were hunters before they were builders. The feeling of the Almighty's city after the fall is one of profound silence. The clicking, dragging, and screaming have stopped. All that remains is the grime of the ruins and the spark of a freedom that feels as heavy as the chains it replaced. The director's choice to show the destruction of the monuments is a final commentary on the vanity of greed. The Almighty's legacy is a pile of rubble. The Yagal's legacy is a handful of seed. One tried to conquer time with stone, the other chose to survive time through growth. The slaver's rhythm is a warning from history, a ghost that haunts any civilization that chooses the weight of monuments over the spark of its people. Ultimately, the transition from the mammoth hunt to the pyramid labor is the story of the human spirit refusing to be mechanical. Daylight is the architect of this refusal. He walked out of a world of organic survival and into a world of industrial death, only to set the whole thing on fire. The white spear punctured the Almighty's godhood, but it was the shared rhythm of the tribes that actually destroyed his empire. They are returning to the mountains not as the people they were, but as survivors of the machine. They carry the grime of the desert in their skin, but the spark of the future is finally in their hands, unburdened by the cold, mechanical greed of a dead god.